Hi, Misha here, and I guess you could say kind of starting the new season, the new year. Continuing to look back at several ships and battles and various things with the new camera, hopefully where you can see things. Let's revisit the Battle of Sector 001, which occurred in 2373. Stardate, I have no clue. I never really got into stardates. Fun fact, when the stardate was originally created for TOS, it was totally random. There was no system. It was just random numbers to make it sound like it's the future. Of course, later on, they've made some kind of system behind it, but yeah. That would be the time when the Borg attempted to invade the Federation again. Or did they? So we'll talk about the battle itself and the various Federation ships and strategies therein. And I know you just saw this model, but since it literally is from First Contact, we have to bring it out at least a little bit briefly. This is the final issue from Eagle Moss's Standard Collection that came out last summer. This is the Borg Cube as appears in First Contact. And it was very much modeled on the cube from Best of Both Worlds, just with more detail, higher fidelity, a few more features like the port to launch the sphere out of, and just, generally speaking, scaled up for the big screen. Also, it has kind of the new Borg color palette, more green, less gray. It is about 3,000 meters on the side, so 3 kilometers, and we see a wide range of crew from just a few tens of thousands, maybe 50 or 60,000, all the way up to nearly 130,000 and potentially more. Now, we've seen tactical cubes. Those are obviously more for combat. This is more what I always used to kind of call the Explorer cube. Long range, deep space, and intended to assimilate entire planets, even perhaps entire societies, which is why they usually only send one. And this is the type that could quickly adapt to weapons. Tractor has, the Borg cutting beam, tractor beam, different pulse weapons. And, of course, the ability to quickly regenerate. Pretty neat model, too. It's actually got some weight. The outside's all plastic, of course, because of the detail, but they actually put like a metal core inside to give it some weight. Not bad either. A few inches on the side. Anyway, the invasion began when the Ivor or Evor Prime colony was attacked and contact was lost, and then a cube was reported in the area of Deep Space 5, and its course was calculated for Sector 001, Earth. It's kind of interesting. Every time the Borg start to do something with the Federation, even the ones that were controlled by lore, they just love attacking a random colony. Yes, it does give the Federation forewarning. On the other hand, since they're assimilating, they do get good up-to-date intel. Not only would they get the computer systems from the colony, but they would get the memories and thoughts and fears of all the colonists, so it does make a little bit of sense. Plus, I don't think the Borg are worried about people know they're coming. I mean, it's in a giant cube that's 3 kilometers on a side and no cloak. It would be kind of hard to miss. So, once again, they send 1 cube. But the Federation, they decide to have a new strategy. When the Borg first invaded, which became the Battle of Wolf 359, the Federation had been at peace for a long time, And their ships were not really geared towards fighting. I mean, the Cardassians gave them a run for their money a decade earlier. Nevertheless, they managed to get 40 ships together at a fleet, all clumped together at Wolf 359, and they used very outdated tactics against the Borg. They were kind of like a Revolutionary War, where you had regiments and ranks. You'd have one wave of 6 ships or 10 ships go at the cube, and then they'd come back, and then they'd have another wave. They gave the Borg plenty of time to adapt and pick them off. And when the cube only had 4, 5, 6, 10 targets even, it could deal with them easier to adapt than all 40. And they kind of just had a stand, hold your ground attitude. Not this time. The defense was commanded by Vice Admiral Hayes, another H name before it was Hansen at Wolf 359. And they would begin to engage the Borg in the Typhon sector. But what they would do, we know they at least had 30 ships, probably more. They would swarm and attack all at once the cube. Again, 3 kilometers on the side, they had plenty of space. Do what damage they could, and once the Borg adapted, they would retreat. And not only would this do incremental damage, obviously the Borg can regenerate, but it would slow the Borg down. So very much hit and run tactics. Strike it, slow the cube down, make the cube respawn, and then once it's adapted, escape, regroup, and do it again a few light years later. It also forced the cube to change course and was a delaying action. It gave time for more ships to be arranged at Earth. And the first 2 Starfleet ships here might seem an odd combo to put together, but actually they fit very well. We have the USS Defiant of the Defiant-class, and we have the USS Bozeman of the Soyuz-class. And the reason I have them together, these 2 were among the first to engage the Borg, and they continued to engage them all the way to Earth. So both were tough little ships. Now the Defiant, of course you do. It was designed to fight the Borg after the disaster that was Wolf 359. This is pretty much the antithesis of the Galaxy-class. Work began around 2366 under the charge of Commander Sisko. But after several years, it was mothballed, but then brought out of storage 5 years later in 2371 to respond to the Dominion. So it was very much available in 2373, and it was commanded by Worf. Now, some have criticized this, saying why didn't Sisko command it? For one, Sisko was probably needed at DS9. For another, his history with the Borg, kind of rocky. And for a third, Worf had fought the Borg multiple times. Next to maybe Picard or Riker, he had the most tactical experience with the Borg. So he was actually a very logical choice to be the commander. And again, being the Dominion being themselves, maybe attacking when the Borg were coming in would be just the distraction they would love to have. So yeah, I think sending Worf made a lot of sense. This ship, we don't really know the size. Some say 120 meters, some say 170. I tend to err on the smaller, maybe 120, 150. That's still a really big ship. Had 4 decks, crew of about 50, which is actually good. Had 4 pulse phasers, 3 beam phaser emitters, 4 forward torpedo launchers, and 2 rear torpedo launchers. And not only did it fire the standard photon torpedoes, which the Borg were aware of, it fired the new quantum torpedoes, which the Borg had not yet encountered. And not only did it have shields that the Borg could counter, it had a blade of armor, which the Borg had a harder time getting through. It was designed to be a Borg fighter, and it did very well. Its small size and maneuverability let it zip around the Borg ship, evading cutting beams and pulses and everything else. So it really was a great choice for fighting the Borg, and I think that's why it stuck in the fight from the beginning to the end, and did survive the fight, although heavily damaged. So what about the Bozeman? Some have said, and we know there was a USS Bozeman, some have said it could not be the old Soyuz-class. And to be fair, I used to be in that camp. I didn't see why it would still be in service. But the more I think about it, I think it was this ship, and canon seems to agree with me. This is the one commanded by Fraser, Kelsey Grammer. And yes, it is an old design, dating back to the 2370s, if not 100 years old, 90. But it went through a temporal rift, and it shaved 80, 90 years off its life. So from its internal chronology, it's technically a new space frame. Also, we see plenty of older Miranda types, which this is a variant of, still in service throughout the entire Dominion War. So if they could be upgraded to keep themselves modern, why could not the Soyuz? Especially considering it was a, again, new ship. Based on the registry number, I think it's 1941, it's newer than the USS Reliant. And it had the new style nacelles. And even though the Federation swears up and down, these are sensors underneath the saucer, we all know they're phaser cannons. It was very clearly designed to be a patrol ship, a cutter, to kind of patrol the Klingon border. So while it was not officially a warship, battleship, he was leaning more that way. It also had better storage capability in the back. It had additional shuttles, shuttle bays. Yeah, I could actually see this being upgraded. And since it was in Season 5 of TNG, by the time of Sector 001, it had had plenty of time to be upgraded. So I actually do think this could have been there. And since in its own chronology, it's maybe 10, maybe 15 years old at most, why not refurbish it and use it? And they were throwing what they could together. And even though the ship was old, she did have a veteran crew and captain. Now, it is debated if Kelsey Grammer had an uncredited cameo line of dialogue in the film. Some say yes, some say no. I guess we may never know for sure, but I like to think he did. As far as we know, the Bozeman survived. And again, it's a relatively small ship, not as small as the Defiant, but you're looking at something around 240 meters. And it had a larger crew of about 200, give or take. But still not a big, massive ship like a Galaxy. So yeah, both of these were in the running fight against the Cube. But one of the most famous things about First Contact, all the new ships. So let's look at a couple of those. When planning for First Contact, they considered just using the same old 3 or 4 ship models that had been done over and over and over. The Miranda, the Excelsior, maybe the Ambassador, the Nebula. But nah, they wanted to give the Federation some new ships. And in 1995, 1996, this became more practical because CGI was starting to become a real thing. Now, it was expensive to do back then and took a lot of processing power. And by today's standards, the models were exceedingly low res. But for the time, it was cutting edge tech. Now, originally I thought they might do as many as 12 new models for the Federation, but this was quickly scaled back to 5, including what would be the new Enterprise. So really 4 new. Here's 2 of them. On the left, we have the Steamrunner-class. Specifically, this is the USS Appalachia. And on the right, we have the Norway-class. specifically the USS Budapest. And these, no one really knows exactly when they came in service. People who look at the registry numbers say they must have been in service for a long time. But based on their looks and design, it seems like they were definitely after the Galaxy-class and all of that generation. So, probably between 2365 and 2368 is when these started to come into service. And we know at least 4 Norway-class were at the battle, and as many as 6 Steamrunner. So these are obviously being mass-produced. And spec-wise, these are very similar. They're both about 365 meters long, and very flat, so a very lean profile head-on. And they have a crew of roughly 200. They also have roughly about the same top speed of warp 9.6, so a little faster than the old Galaxy. And they were designed slightly different roles. The Steamrunner is classified as a heavy frigate. And it's a patrol craft, a transport craft, some say a troop carrier, because it does have large bays. It has a couple of standard phaser arrays, and while it only has 2 photon dispensers, launchers, they actually have very large magazines. Each carries 250 torpedoes. Now these are still photons, but that's 500 torpedoes, whereas the old Galaxy carried just about 220, so double the photon capacity of a Galaxy in a much slimmer hull. Plus it can carry troops or whatever else. And it's a pretty sturdy design, if not, I don't know, sexy. I mean, it's a very workaday design. But sometimes I like to think of this as a missile boat or a torpedo boat. Now, the Norway is kind of its opposite. Instead of having phaser strips, phaser arrays, it has 6 to 9 phaser cannons or pulse phasers, similar to what the Defiant has. It has a couple of torpedo bays too, but the cannon are its primary thing. It also has a new warp drive that's very compact in the back here, designed to be durable and better protected. After the glass cannon incidents of the Galaxy, you can understand why they probably wanted to do that. Now, these were not the most cutting-edge ships the Federation would have to offer, but they were fresh takes on the old design, and I really like them for that. Now, we saw the Steamrunner quite a bit in the Dominion War arc of DS9, and a couple of times in Voyager, but the Norway really never appears again except in some displays, because real world, the model, the mesh they used was either corrupted, lost, or incompatible. Either way, it wasn't usable like the other ships. So unfortunately, it was really just in First Contact. And I'm really happy that Eaglemoss did make a model of it. Both of these are actually quite neat. So yeah, they were new models for the Federation. But that doesn't mean everyone got a shiny new ship. Plenty of old classics were there too. 3 Oberth-class ships were spotted, and at least 2 of the good old Miranda. You can see the resemblance, of course, to the Soyuz. Now, Eaglemoss has given us a number of Miranda variants, and I just decided to put this model out. This is the Antares, because we see this one in the Dominion War. It's one of the newer designs that has this kind of weapons pod on the back. I thought it was apt. But the old Oberth, there's really only the one, the only. So the specs for the Miranda we've already really talked about. It's slightly shorter than the Soyuz, at about 230 meters. and they were updated and upgraded. In fact, they were still producing them well into the 24th century. Originally, these were classified as medium cruisers in the 23rd century, but by the 24th century, they are more along the lines of a destroyer or a frigate. And that's how they're used, almost like cannon fodder. But they're available, and they can lend themselves to the battle, and if they're fitted with modern phasers and torpedoes, yeah, I can see their purpose. However, the Oberth, I don't know why these keep popping up where the Borg are at. We saw one in Wolf 359, and now we see multiples at Sector 001, so you can't say they were there by accident. It was a good science ship. It's not all that big. It's about 150 meters long. There's argument. Crew of about 80, although sometimes more, sometimes less. But it has minimal defenses. No torpedoes usually, and just a phaser array. Because again, science. The only thing it really has is this pod down here and very good sensors. But unless they upgraded these a lot, as in taking the phase cloak from the Pegasus and throwing it in one, I don't know why they're there. But it is kind of funny. It's almost a joke at this point. Well, they are small at least. Realistically, they might be there as support craft or medical craft. And again, maybe loaning their sensors. And maybe they just blundered into the battle, which seems to be kind of the Oberth thing to do. But they were there, and we have a couple models from Eaglemoss, so let's count them towards the fleet. These two together give us 5 more ships for the fleet. So you might be wondering why I have Voyager here. Did she take a trip across the galaxy to fight the Borg and then go all the way back to the Delta Quadrant? I have my reasons. I'll explain. But first, the Nebula. This really has become the replacement for the Miranda, both in the real world and in the Star Trek universe, and it has the very common thing. It's a medium cruiser, very flexible, dependable, versatile. It's about 440 meters long, crew of 750, a very respectable maximum warp. Nice compact system, doesn't seem to have the glass cannon effect of the Galaxy, and it has this interchangeable pod on the top. I just decided to pick the Melbourne here because this ship was destroyed at Wolf 359, and it has the secondary engine pod. It could also have a sensor pod as seen on the Phoenix, or a weapons pod as seen throughout the Dominion War on several ships. And it's not just a Galaxy-class kit bash. It's actually its own little model. But yeah, at least 3 of these were at the battle. One was Endeavour, which was perhaps the sole survivor, at least intact survivor, of Wolf 359. Another was Lexington. And it would be a good ship for the Borg, maybe a little big and not designed for battle. More of a science ship, like I said, a medium cruiser, but they were alright in the Dominion War. More effective than a Galaxy, I would say. But it is one of the largest ships overall that we will find at this battle. It's always been kind of one of my favorite models, too, designs. I'm glad that Eaglemoss gave us 3 of them. But they were there. Interestingly, it's really the only next generation style ship at Sector 001. We don't see any of the others or a Galaxy. And for once, we actually don't see an Excelsior either. Alright, so why did I put Voyager out? Well, this isn't acting as Voyager. This is acting as the Intrepid class, specifically the USS Intrepid. And as is said in the pilot episode of Voyager and several, this was designed as an exploration ship, but also with some teeth. It was designed for combat. It has neuro circuitry, blah blah blah, modern shields, variable geometry warp field, blah blah blah. Has the kind of the new styling saucer, but kind of the old style deflector, phaser arrays, torpedoes, and it was relatively small, quick, lean and mean. At about 340 meters, and a crew of about 140. Now, the Intrepid type was not introduced until around 2370. And while Voyager was an early member, you would think the first one would be the USS Intrepid herself. So if she was launched in 2370, 2371, that time frame, and we know that there was a USS Intrepid supposedly at the battle, ergo, it should be the ship of this class. Some sources even suggest that it could have been Admiral Hayes' flagship, which we never see on screen because it's destroyed by the time we get to the battle. And one more reason I decided to include it, in the trailers for First Contact back in 1996, they actually took stock footage of Voyager fighting the Borg and put them in the trailers, implying that if not Voyager herself, at least an Intrepid class was fighting the Borg in the film. Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, but why not? Of course, in reality, they were doing Scorpion Part 1 and Part 2. Voyager was meeting the Borg right around the same time as his First Contact was going on. So it all meshed together really well. So my proposal is that at least the USS Intrepid herself was at the battle, because it would just make a lot of sense, and this would be a good command ship for the good Admiral. And it's a good bridge between the next generation ship design and our newer designs. And speaking of, let's look at a couple more of those. We have the Akira-class, which is a huge fan favorite. And we have the Sabre-class. Let's start with it. This is the USS Jaeger, named after Chuck Yeager. He was at the battle. And at least 5 of this new class were there. And these came online around 2368. And they seem to be kind of on the same lines as the Defiant, but a little more conservative, whereas the Defiant was very clearly an all-out warship, although they often called it an escort for political reasons. The Saber was definitely leaning in that direction, but was classified as a light cruiser or escort ship. It was definitely designed with combat in mind. It had forward-facing weapons, decent phaser array. It actually carried a large number of torpedoes for its size, and it was small. A little bit bigger than the Defiant. It was about 180, 190 meters, and it had 6 decks instead of the Defiant's 4, but it had about the same crew of 50. It also had a couple of small shuttle bays. Nevertheless, they were bigger than the Defiants. And whereas the Defiant had very basic medical systems, sensors, science suites, the Sabre-class had more of those. So it had more ability to do science-y stuff. But it was still a nice, quick ship, about warp 9.7. It was dependable, whereas the Defiant was kind of a hot rod. This was a little more dependable. It was also cheap and easy to mass produce. So just a good, reliable ship. In times of war, she could operate as a destroyer, cruiser. In times of peace, she could be a survey craft or or even replace the good old Oberth. So yeah, she fit in really well, and I like this design. It kind of is a nice bridge between a more conventional design and the full-blown Defiant. I think it fits in very well. Good secondary ship. Now, the Akira. This really was the standout favorite of the 4 fleet ships, even amongst the creators, which is why it was kind of the most detailed model. It's also the largest. It is either classified as a medium cruiser or a heavy cruiser. By the way, this is the USS Thunderchild. And there were at least 3 Akiras at the battle. And overall length is about 480 meters, so she's pretty much the biggest one we've seen so far. And has a crew of about 500. And she's probably one of the quickest, with the max warp of about 9.8. Only maybe the Intrepid being a smidge faster. Now, some people claim it has a crazy number of photon torpedo tubes. I don't subscribe to this. I will admit that it probably has over 350 torpedoes on board, but the claims that it has 15, 20, 25 torpedo launchers, it just wouldn't make sense. For one thing, you wouldn't have that many torpedoes per launcher, and why do you need that many? But it was definitely a torpedo carrier. It also was geared towards shuttles or fighters. It had a large shuttle bay in the front and 2 smaller shuttle bays in the rear. And they were all kind of connected, so you could move shuttles from one bay to the other. This would be good in times of war, if you're launching assault shuttles, troop shuttles, or even fighters. And in times of peace, they'd be good for evacuation, transport, or just moving people a lot when you can't do transporter systems. And it has this compact warp system. Again, just become a fan favorite, so much so that it inspired the NX-01, which I've done a full video talking about that. But yeah, medium to heavy cruiser, and definitely gave the Borg a run for their money. And it was used along with the Saber extensively during the Dominion War, and both acquitted themselves very well. And these were nearly the most modern ships there. But of course, there was the most modern ship, although it would come late to the party. The most advanced ship in the fleet, the 5th new ship the Federation received in the movie, and of course the new star of the movie, the Enterprise NCC 1701E, the Sovereign-class. Interestingly, the actual USS Sovereign was NCC 7500. And the project dated back quite a ways, and they did start to work on the design around 2365 after the Galaxy was done, but in 2367 it was radically updated with new weapons and everything, again following Wolf 359. And the Sovereign was launched sometime between 2370 and 2371. And after its successful shakedown cruise, the good old Enterprise was launched in early 2372. This had everything. It was classified as a heavy cruiser or battleship, at least in times of war. It was 700 meters long, had a crew of roughly 800. And it had new TARDIS technology, bigger on the inside, because externally it has 24 decks, but internally it has 26. Not as impressive as a TARDIS, but hey, you gotta start somewhere, right? The funny thing is, we actually know in the Star Trek universe this technology is advanced and happens because of Enterprise, and they found the future ship. And after trying out the quantum torpedoes on the Defiant-class, it was integrated in a turret-style launcher for the Sovereign here. It also carried standard photon torpedoes, and it had standard phaser arrays, although they're considered heavy or high output. It has regenerative redundant shielding. It has 2 bio-neuro cores, one in the engineering section, one in the saucer. Yeah, it's pretty much everything. It's designed for exploration and diplomacy and obviously combat. But most other ships we've looked at are relatively small, easy to produce, and have small crews. This is the opposite. So this wasn't something the Federation was going to produce in huge numbers. This was command ship, flagships for fleets. And that's what the Enterprise was. So one would think as soon as the Borg were detected, they would be ordered to Sector 001 best speed. But as you all know, because you've seen the film, I'm sure, the Enterprise is actually ordered to patrol the Romulan neutral zone. And some people, think and say that, and it's kind of portrayed the movie like this was done to slight Picard. I actually think it was Admiral Hayes being respectful, and because he was well assimilated by the Borg, much as I said with Sisko having PTSD just seeing his wife killed at Wolf 359. Imagine being assimilated there and actually responsible for the death of 11,000 Starfleet officers and the destruction of 39 starships. So I can forgive Hayes if he thought that might not be something worth putting Picard back through, even if he was wrong. But nevertheless, as we know, once the battle turns against the Federation, again, it's a running battle, so it takes place over several hours, if not even day. The Enterprise warps. Luckily, the neutral zone is quite close to Earth. This is something that's kind of been established in Star Trek canon for a long time. And they get there shortly after Hayes' flagship is destroyed, and Picard, having seniority, takes command of the fleet. One of the first things he does is rescue the Defiant, commanded by Worf and his crew. And goes on to defeat the Borg by targeting their waste management system, which makes sense because in Best of Both Worlds, they attack the bedroom, the boudoir of the Borg to destroy them. So now it only makes sense that they attacked the toilet, or even worse, the septic tank. So, yeah, I imagine if someone blew up your septic tank in your yard, that'd make you want to quit fighting pretty quick, too. Of course, it doesn't end there. It launches a sphere, time travel shenanigans ensue, and a generally decent movie afterwards. But only the one sovereign there, and it quits itself well. It was a needed reinforcement. The fleet had been worn down. They were pretty much at their last line. They weren't quite at Earth yet. They were not in orbit, but they were close, maybe Mars. And they'd been fighting, like I said, for a long time. And the Enterprise comes in with all of its power, fully operational and ready to kick some ass. So, yeah, kind of saved the day, as hero ships are wont to do. And one thing I want to say, like I said, 11,000 lives, 39 ships were lost at Wolf 359. Now, the Federation had at least 30 ships that participated in the Borg fight here. And at least 20 of those were destroyed. So 2/3 were destroyed. This would seem like a horrific loss, or at least a Pyrrhic victory. And don't get me wrong, the loss of life was bad. But because the ships were smaller, they had smaller crews. It's much better to lose 50 people, or even 200, say, on those ships, versus 750 on a Nebula, or 1,000 on a Galaxy. So the loss of life was much less, and the loss of ships. The 39 ships lost at Wolf 359, that really impacted the Federation. They were short-shipped for at least 2 years. It took them a long time to recover. But because they were using Defiant classes, Sabre-classes, Steamrunners, etc., these ships are easier to produce, so the loss of materiel wasn't as dramatic either. And we can see this because they're still fully able to mount a defense against the Dominion when they begin the war a short time later. In fact, in the Dominion War, we see ships counted in the hundreds or even thousands, which is a first for Star Trek. Typically, yeah, Wolf 359 with 40 ships was one of the absolute largest fleets we'd ever heard of in the show before that. And with Deep Space Nine, they amped that up 100-fold. And that means, yeah, our Sovereign here is the last ship. And these really were the last ships. I mean, there were some other new ones, but the last kind of major batch of new ships for the Federation. After this, we go to Enterprise, which is in the past. And then we get Discovery, which is also in the past. And then Picard didn't have many new ships. Just 2 or 3 new designs. So it was a nice infusion of new fodder for the universe. And again, while the Norway didn't appear again because of logistical reasons, and while the Sovereign doesn't really appear much outside of the movies because they wanted to keep the Enterprise special, we still got the Steamrunner, the Akira, and the Saber. And we would later get ships like the Prometheus, too. And they kicked the Borg's butt. And notice the Borg never tried to do a direct invasion afterwards. I feel like I'm forgetting one ship, though. Would you believe me if I told you this is the entire reason I did this video? I mean, I kind of thought about looking at the First Contact fleet again with a new camera anyway. But I also wanted to mention the Millennium Falcon. But why the hell do I have it in a Star Trek video? And why the hell do I have it at all? This model, I mean. Well, it's in this video because it is legitimately in the battle. I think most of you probably know, but just in case you don't, ILM, who did the visual effects for Star Wars, did the visual effects for First Contact. And when they were working on First Contact, they were also working on a little thing called the Special Edition Trilogy, which meant they had a new fancy digital model of everyone's favorite YT-1300 freighter, the Millennium Falcon. So, in a little cheeky move, they stuck it in the battle scene. And we're not talking indistinct blurry blob that some say looks like the Falcon in this bizarre Rorschach test. No, it was, it is in the background, it is hard to see, but it is legitimately there, and they admit to it being there. And it's there in more than one scene, zipping around in the background. So it is truly a canon ship in Star Trek. I mean, it was in a major film, in a major battle in a major film, and there in multiple scenes. You don't get more legit than that. Now, why is it there? The real world, they were having fun. It's an Easter egg. In universe, who the hell knows? In the Wolf 359, they had the Klingons send reinforcements. They even requested the Romulans send reinforcements. I guess the call went out farther and wider than they expected. And the Millennium Falcon came to help. Why not? Actually, wouldn't be a bad ship to go against the Borg. It had triple shielding, which the Borg would hate. And, okay, you think, oh, it's got lasers. That's nothing in the Star Trek universe. The thing is, they're not lasers. Energy output-wise, they're pretty good. Although they have pretty short range. It had 2 quad-array laser mounts, and it had 2 concussion missile launchers in the front, plus a tractor beam. The one area that Star Wars ships really own Star Trek ships go warp 9, give or take, in the Next Generation era. And we know that Voyager, traveling about 70,000 light years, would take about 70 years to get home. So about 1,000 light years per year. Very fast. The thing is, in Star Wars, they could do that in about 15 minutes. The Millennium Falcon can travel across the Star Wars galaxy in a week or two. Now, it is fast. It has a class 0.5 hyperdrive. The lower the number, the faster it is. And it's actually been said that it could probably travel between galaxies in about 100 days, as fast as it is. And all Star Wars ships are fast compared to Star Trek, because they do travel the galaxy. For example, Luke's X-Wing, it can only support human life for a week, and it goes from Hoth to Dagobah and then to Cloud City and all this. So obviously it's traveling in a few hours or a few days. Time that it would take years, even decades, for Star Trek ships to fly through. So there's that. Just for some fun specs, it's about 35 meters. Has a crew of 4, pilot, co-pilot, plus 2 gunners. It can carry up to 6 passengers comfortably. And about 100 metric tons of cargo, because this is still a freighter. And it always made me scratch my head why Lando flew it in. Okay, if he wants to fly it in the battle, over indoor, I get that. Why would you fly a freighter into a space station? That seems like a great job for A-Wings. Anyway, this model, like the Eagle Moss, is die-cast too. It's actually from Hot Wheels, who has the contract for the Star Wars stuff. In the past, they've been made by D'Agostini, Micro Machines. There's the Titanium in the Black Series. Now, one kind of neat thing about some of these, unlike the Eagle Moss, which are always fixed, they have moving parts. For example, on this one, the sensor dish moves. It's very tight, but it does move. And they come with little stands, but they plug into holes. Now, they're not as high quality as Eagle Moss, not even close, but they're also a lot cheaper, $5. So why do I have this? Actually, it's because of Christmas. My mother gave me one as not a gag gift, just kind of a funny little gift. And I told my wife when I got it, it'll actually fit right in with my Star Trek stuff, because it was in First Contact. And that's why I decided to do this video. And actually, moreover, because there has not been much new to talk about for Star Trek, or even Battlestar Galactica, I will probably start doing some Star Wars videos. Some have asked, some probably grown, but I'm going to have fun with it, and if you'd like to join me, I'll be putting out some pretty soon, comparison videos, looking at different models, and maybe even comparing with Star Trek ships, like a versus thing. I don't know, just whatever kind of crosses my fancy. So this seemed like a good segue video to announce I'll be doing some of those in the upcoming weeks and months. Looking at everyone's favorite things. Star Destroyers, TIE Fighters, X-Wings. My favorite one from the Clone Wars, the ARC 170. So what do you think of the First Contact fleet in this kind of run-through of the battle? Again, it was an enjoyable film. I saw it in the theaters and then had it on DVD. It's actually one of the first movies I ever had on DVD, because when I got my first player. And I recognize its faults, but still can't change the fact that I enjoyed it. So, I felt like doing a tribute. So which one's your favorite? Or which one is your least favorite? What do you think? Let's talk. Hell, let's talk about Star Wars if you'd rather. Or tell me how much you hate Star Wars. Or love it. I don't care. Let's just have some fun. After the months we've had recently, we all deserve to blow some steam off. With that, this is Misha, and I will catch you very soon in a galaxy far, far away next time.